I had imagined this homecoming for over 2 decades, but I never expected the door to close the moment I stood before it. The fall air was sharp with the scent of dry leaves and chimney smoke. Yellow and amber leaves danced along the driveway as I stepped out of the cab, my duffel bag slung over one shoulder, the other hand carrying a small box of souvenirs. A soft ache swelled in my chest. Everything looked smaller now. The house, the yard, even the street where I used to ride my bike. But the knot in my stomach tightened as I walked up the cracked stone path toward the front door of my childhood home in rural Pennsylvania. I paused just a second before knocking. For a moment, I saw myself again, maybe 9 or 10, standing quietly in that very living room corner, clutching my book while my parents showered Amber with praise for her science fair trophy. I had placed second. They never noticed. The door creaked open. Amber stood there. She looked surprised. Her mouth moved, forming something like my name, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Natalie," she said, blinking as if I were a ghost. "Hey," I replied with a cautious smile. Didn't think I'd need an invitation. She opened the door a little wider. "You didn't call." I lifted the box slightly. Figured I'd bring my own welcome. Thought maybe Mom'd like these some handmade candles from base. And for Dad, a coin from the old unit. Amber stepped aside. "They're in the kitchen." The house smelled of lemon cleaner and something baking, but the warmth didn't reach me. As I stepped inside, I caught sight of Mom Evelyn in her usual spot at the kitchen island chopping apples. Dad stood at the coffee machine, reading something on his phone. They looked up at the same time. The pause that followed was longer than necessary. "Hi," I said. Their eyes went to my uniform. Not dress blues, just my old fatigues, pressed as best I could. I had nothing fancy, just memories and worn-out boots. "You're here," Mom said flatly. "You didn't say. I wanted it to be a surprise." Dad set his mug down. "Did you just get out?" I nodded. Last month, he gave a curt nod. "You didn't bring much." I looked around. "Where's the car?" "The Thunderbird." Silence. Then Dad answered, "Sold it last year." My stomach sank. "You sold my car." "There wasn't room for old junk." He said, "You weren't using it. That car." My voice cracked. But I caught myself. "It was in my name. It was in the garage of our house," he countered. "Matter of fact, we needed the space." I stared at him. I wanted to ask if they used the money for Amber's wedding or one of their cruises, but I bit my tongue. I turned to Mom. "You didn't even tell me." She picked up an apple slice and shrugged. "We didn't think it mattered. You were gone. Gone like a stranger. Like a package returned to send her." Amber hovered near the stairs. "I didn't know either," she mumbled. I looked around again, at the photos on the wall, at the empty space where my car used to sit, at the kitchen I had imagined so many times from my bunk. I thought there would be hugs, maybe a banner, or at least coffee. Dad walked over and crossed his arms. "Natalie, you chose your path. Military life, discipline, independence. We respected that." I straightened my shoulders. "I gave 20 years. No one asked you to," he snapped. "You chose that over family. So maybe you should go back to the barracks where you belong." The air thinned. The room blurred around the edges. I hadn't expected a parade, but I hadn't expected exile either. I opened my mouth, wanted to say Mom, but the word caught in my throat like a splinter. I swallowed it. No one said anything. Amber looked down at the floor. Mom went back to her apples. Dad picked up his mug again, like I wasn't even there. I turned toward the door, each step heavier than the last. I stepped down from the porch box, still in my hand, and turned to look at the house. the white shutters, the cracked steps, the windows I used to peer through as a girl. It looked the same, but it had never felt more foreign. I took a step back from the threshold, staring at the familiar house as if seeing it for the first time from the outside. I used to be their pride, but maybe only when I was inside a picture frame. The kitchen was quiet now, save for the occasional clink of a spoon against a ceramic mug. I had sat through dinners in war zones with more warmth than this. Amber scrolled through her phone, trying to show me something about Paris, but the words drifted past me like static. I glanced at the photo behind her crooked dusty, nearly hidden by the edge of a spice rack. It was me in uniform at my first oath ceremony. I was standing tall, stiff, with nerves and determination. That photo used to hang in the living room I remembered. Now, it clung to a nail behind the kitchen door, as if someone couldn't bring themselves to throw it away, but didn't want to see it either. Amber caught me looking. "Oh," she said, twisting around. "That's still there." "Yeah," I said. "Didn't expect to find it. Here." She smiled weakly and sipped from her glass. "You look so young." I was 19. That day felt bigger than anything. Mom set a pie on the counter and peeled off her oven mitts. "Your cousin Henry's son just joined Goldman Sachs," she said, as if that was a natural extension of the conversation. Dad chuckled. "Smart kid knows where the future is." I tried to ignore the sting. We all take different roads. He gave me a glance that said, I'd taken the wrong one. Amber swiped again and leaned closer to show her screen. "Here's the Amalfi Coast. We rented a yacht for a day." The photo was stunning. Clear blue water, her boyfriend grinning, both of them holding cocktails. I managed a smile. "Looks beautiful." It was though Venice was overcrowded. "You wouldn't believe the prices." "Yeah," I said. "Europe's gotten expensive." The room shifted again. I felt like a ghost haunting my own memories. "You know," Dad said, sitting back, "if you'd just gone into finance like I planned, you could have traveled like that too. Or even better." I stared at him. "You planned?" "I mean, we had hopes," he said with a wave. "All those math awards, your analytical brain. You could have been VP by now, maybe at Chase." "Instead, I managed a crisis zone in Kabul," I said softly. Evelyn wiped the counter, her back to me. "You always picked the hard road." "Natalie." I opened my mouth to speak, then closed it again. There was no point. Amber tried to ease the tension. "Mom, remember when Natalie sent money for the roof repairs?" Mom nodded vaguely, but didn't turn around. Dad took a bite of pie like nothing was said. "That time, she covered the bills when I was between jobs." Amber added. Silence. I could feel the burn in my throat. "It's okay," I said. "I didn't expect a medal." Evelyn finally turned, her eyes tired. "You always make it sound like we failed you, but you chose paths we couldn't follow, then blamed us for being left behind." Her voice wasn't harsh, but it cut deeper, because it was weary, as if my entire life had been an inconvenience to her. "I never blamed you," I said. "I just wanted you to see me." "You're right here," Harold muttered, "and all you've brought is rain." I didn't know if he meant the weather or my presence. Maybe both. I stood up. The weight of everything pressed down heavier than the gear I used to carry. No one tried to stop me. Outside, the wind had picked up. Autumn leaves skittered across the sidewalk, and the first drops of rain hit my shoulders. I didn't run. I welcomed the cold, the sting. It grounded me more than anything inside that house had. I pulled out my phone. My fingers hovered, then moved quickly through the familiar system, Military Resources Veteran Aid Emergency Shelter. Finally, I found it, a transitional housing facility for former service members about 45 minutes away. I took a deep breath and clicked Get directions. The sky opened up. Rain poured down as if the heavens themselves were done pretending. I walked away, the screen still glowing in my palm, and never looked back. Perhaps I should have known from the start that home isn't the place with a roof over your head. It's the place that doesn't shut the door when all you carry is the truth. The fluorescent lights above the reception desk flickered, casting a sterile glow over the cracked linoleum floor. The Army lodging facility was no Ritz-Carlton, but it was warm, quiet, and more welcoming than my parents' house. I signed the check-in sheet with a hand that still felt stiff from the cold rain outside, my name barely legible on the carbon copy. The receptionist, a young corporal with tired eyes, gave me a small nod and slid a plastic key card across the counter. Room 207, Sergeant Major, mess halls down the corridor. Dinners till 2100. I thanked him with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Just Sergeant, I said, correcting him automatically. The word Major still sat like a ghost on my shoulder. My boots thudded against the hallway's worn carpet as I made my way to my room. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and something metallic like old radiator heat. I dropped my duffel beside the bed and hung my uniform jacket carefully on the back of a wooden chair. It was the same one I had worn when I received my final commendation, a row of ribbon stitched above the heart, now dulled by time and memory. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I turned away, unable to decide whether it was pride or sorrow that tightened my throat. Later, the mess hall buzzed with soft conversation. Trays clattered, forks scraped, and somewhere in the back, a radio played an old country song. I picked at a tray of meatloaf and instant mashed potatoes when I heard a voice I hadn't heard in years. Well, hell, if it isn't Natalie Pierce. I turned slowly, spoon halfway to my mouth. There he stood, Marcus Bell, same cocky grin, though his hair had thinned and his posture had stiffened. He wore a pressed uniform and a confident air that suggested he hadn't aged a day since Kandahar. Marcus, I said, and despite myself, I smiled. You're still alive. That's what the VA keeps telling me, he said, with a chuckle, sliding into the chair across from me without asking. Heard you were back in town. You must have heard wrong, I muttered. I'm just passing through. His gaze narrowed slightly. Family not too thrilled to have you home. I didn't answer. My silence said enough. He leaned back, folding his arms. You know the president's prepping this big recognition ceremony. Something national high honors. Rumor is one of our own might be named. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. I'm sure someone deserves it. You ever think he said slowly that maybe it's you? I looked at him, expression guarded. That's a long shot. I don't think so, he replied. You were always the one. You held our unit together when everything else was falling apart. You led without needing stripes. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. Apparently, that doesn't count for much in my hometown. His eyes softened. I always thought you'd be the first one of us to get pinned a star. Honestly, I still think I'm right. That hit harder than I expected. I looked down at my tray, appetite gone. There was something in his voice. Conviction, maybe, or the sting of recognition I hadn't realized I craved. We sat in silence a while longer, and then I made my excuse and left. Back in my room, the shadows had lengthened, and the old radiator hissed like it was trying to whisper secrets. I tossed my coat over the bed and picked up my phone to silence a message notification blinking on the screen. But it wasn't a text. It was an encrypted email from a Pentagon address I hadn't seen in over a year. Subject invitation. National recognition ceremony. Classification top secret. Eyes only. Priority. Immediate response required. My hands trembled as I clicked it open. The invitation was short, clinical, but unmistakable in meaning. A single line stood out etched into my vision. Like a brand, you have been selected for national recognition. Clearance code Majan Theta Blue. Confidential until announced. I sat back in the chair, phone still glowing in my hand. So it was real. So was the war I'd just begun with my past. The morning light crawled through the narrow window slats of the military lodging and slicing the room into thin beams of gold and shadow. I sat on the edge of the small bed. Email, open on my phone, fingers frozen above the screen. The words had been burned into my memory hours ago. Presidential combination, classified attendance, live national broadcast. I wasn't sure if it felt surreal or stupidly ironic. I set the phone down and leaned against the window, watching a squirrel dart across the parking lot outside. Just beneath that stillness was a tension, like the entire world was holding its breath and waiting for something to snap. Maybe that something was me. A soft vibration buzzed in my hand. "Marcus," I answered. "You saw it, huh?" he said without preamble. "I did. You going?" I hesitated. "Does it even matter if I do?" He exhaled. "You're the only one they're naming. You know that, right?" I figured. You're going to be on CNN. They're already teasing the segment. I didn't respond. My mind was somewhere else, back in that dusty garage, hands covered in oil. As I rebuilt the engine of the Thunderbird, with Dad long before his pride calcified into disappointment, I remembered how I'd beamed when I drove it back from my first base. How it felt like a piece of freedom I had earned on my own terms. But now it was gone, sold, like I was never coming back. Elsewhere, just a few miles across town, my family was gathered in the living room, sipping coffee from matching mugs that bore the phrase, "World's Best Family." The flat-screen TV cast a soft glow over the neutral-toned walls, and Evelyn sat primly, legs crossed, a folded napkin in her lap, despite the absence of food. Amber lounged on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Harold flipped the remote between channels until he paused on CNN. Next Monday, the anchorwoman was saying a national broadcast will honor key figures in modern military strategy. The president himself will take part in the ceremony, expected to be one of the most watched moments in recent defense history. Evelyn perked up. "Isn't that the same day as the gala at the country club?" Amber shrugged. "Probably just some old generals." "Boring." Harold chuckled, dry and sharp. "More propaganda. Dress-up medals and uniforms to distract from the budget." None of them asked who might be honored. None of them wondered if someone they knew, someone in their own bloodline, might be standing in that spotlight. Back in the barracks, I pulled on my worn-out boots and stepped outside. The air was brisk, autumn sharp, and clean. A group of soldiers were going through morning drills in the training yard beyond the fence. Their movements were crisp, precise, a rhythm of discipline I knew better than my own heartbeat. For the first time in days, I let myself smile. Not a grin, not even relief, just something quiet. A muscle memory of who I had always been beneath the pain. "Not yet," I whispered to the wind. "It's not time to tell them yet." When I returned to my room, a new notification pulsed on my screen. Another update from the Pentagon. Subject final confirmation. Live presidential address body. The president will personally award the commendation and read your full name, rank, and contribution aloud on national television. I reread the line over and over, not because I didn't believe it, but because I did. I was no longer the girl in the dusty photo, or the woman erased from the family albums. I was about to become someone they could no longer ignore, not even if they tried. They didn't invite me to Sunday dinner, but the president invited me to the White House. I stood in front of the mirror, the full dress uniform crisp against my skin. the 4 stars on my shoulders weighing more than any battlefield gear I'd ever worn. The metals freshly polished caught the faint light streaming in through the window. I adjusted the collar one last time, my fingers brushing the threadbare ribbon stitched over my heart, the one that had survived Afghanistan, Iraq, and the countless silence of coming home to no one. "You look." Marcus's voice trailed off as he stepped into the room. "Damn, Natalie, that uniform was made for you." I gave him a faint smile. It took 20 years and every ounce of doubt to grow into it. Outside, crews were setting up temporary barriers and media tents. Flags fluttered across the lawn, and a podium had been assembled beneath the seal of the Department of Defense. It felt surreal. I'd walked through mortar fire. I'd held dying comrades. I'd crawled through mud so thick it felt like death's own hands. And yet standing here preparing to be recognized live on national television made my hands shake in a way combat never had. Marcus handed me a program. "Your name's at the top of the list. First to be called. The president himself will do it." My throat tightened. I stared at the paper like it was a classified document from my early days. Dangerous, sensitive, irreversible. "They'll all hear it tomorrow," he added. "The whole country." I nodded but said nothing. My mind flicked to a different kitchen, a different kind of Sunday. One where my mother was probably basting a roast chicken humming softly. My father might be sorting bills or reading the paper. Amber. Oh, perfect. Amber scrolling endlessly on her phone. The phone she held right now might already be vibrating with the truth. Across town, I imagined that very scene. Evelyn placing the golden-skinned chicken into the oven. Harold grumbling about rising grocery prices. Amber stretched across the couch scrolling. Her eyes narrowed. She paused. A single headline caught her attention. "Tomorrow's ceremony, to honor unsung heroes of national defense." And just beneath it, trending # Natalie Green. "Me," she murmured, eyes still glued to the screen. "Kai Tanai Quen Lam." Evelyn didn't look up. "What are you mumbling about?" Amber frowned, turning the phone toward her. But the moment passed. The news segment changed. Her attention flitted elsewhere. Meanwhile, in the Pentagon courtyard, I paced slowly beneath the autumn trees. Bronze leaves swirled around my boots. I thought of the times I'd walked similar steps toward briefings, toward farewells, toward helicopters that never returned the same. The tall man in civilian dress stepped toward me. The Secretary of Defense, he offered his hand with a reverence that startled me. "Tomorrow, Major General Green, the nation will learn your name, and we will owe you a debt we can never repay." "Thank you, sir," I said quietly. "But I didn't do it to be known." "No," he agreed. "But that's exactly why you must be." Later, Marcus and I sat on a bench near the perimeter. His voice was softer now, personal. "You sure you don't want to invite them? We can make room." I didn't look at him, just watched a young private walking her German shepherd near the barracks. The dog paused, sniffed the air, then looked up at its handler like it sensed something important had shifted. "They had every day for 20 years to ask me where I was," I said. "They never did." Marcus exhaled through his nose, nodding. "Besides," I added, "standing to leave, they already made their choice." That night, I packed my things carefully. The invitation embossed with the presidential seal sat unopened on my desk. Tomorrow would come. The whole world would be watching. But for tonight, I let silence be my guest. And as I lay down somewhere in the house that no longer felt like mine, a television blinked on 10:00 a.m. Tomorrow, live from Washington, D.C., the president will honor our nation's most outstanding defenders. Stay tuned. When the president read my name live on national television, The whole nation applauded. My family, on the other hand, fell silent. The ceremonial hall was awash in white and gold crisp military uniforms lined the front rows, and the presidential seal gleamed behind the podium. I stood at the edge, hidden just out of frame, as the CNN broadcast flickered across televisions in every state, including the one in my parents' living room. Amber's voice once echoed in my head like a ghost. You'll never be recognized by anyone outside this house. I used to believe her. For years I measured my worth by the silence of those who should have clapped first. President Holbrooke stepped forward, tall, composed, and dignified. His speech opened with the usual honor service sacrifice strategy, but I felt the tremble in my fingertips grow with each passing minute. This moment was real, and I wasn't ready. In a time when our nation faced unprecedented threats, the president said, "One mind brought clarity to chaos. One leader forged not in comfort, but in crisis charted the course we followed to security." My breath hitched. The Department of Defense, in partnership with the National Security Council, proudly recognizes Colonel Natalie Green for groundbreaking strategic leadership, unwavering service, and unshakable integrity. I heard applause, like a wave crashing forward. But in my mind, all I could picture was a suburban living room in Pennsylvania. Evelyn's hand slipped the crystal tumbler, hit the carpet with a dull thud. Amber's phone froze in mid-scroll. Harold didn't speak. He just stared at the screen, watching the daughter he'd dismissed be called a national hero. The room at the White House blurred as I stepped forward. The president extended his hand. "Welcome, Major General Green," he said, pinning the insignia over my heart. I saluted crisp and exact, then lowered my hand to the thunder of applause. Cameras zoomed in. I smiled, not because I felt victorious, but because the tears wouldn't stay hidden forever. This was not revenge. This was liberation. Behind me, Marcus whispered, "I told you they'd see you." And they did. Just too late. Somewhere in the crowd, General Cooper nodded. I caught his eye, and in that instant, every night, I spent staring at ration maps. Every hour, commanding from sand-swept tents. Every soldier. I lost all of it, compressed into one breath. One name finally spoken aloud. Back in that quiet Pennsylvania house, Evelyn sat unmoving as the words Major General Green echoed from the TV speakers. The silence was louder than the applause. Later in the black SUV, taking me back to the Pentagon quarters, my phone buzzed violently in my lap. I didn't want to look, didn't need to, but I did. Dad, 15 missed calls. When I lived in silence, no one bothered to check in. Now that the news says my name, everyone suddenly remembers me. The alert tone on my phone hadn't stopped since I returned to the military hotel that evening. Notifications piled up like snow in a storm. Unread texts, voicemails, tagged, posts, emails from addresses I hadn't seen in over a decade. My name was everywhere, splashed across news tickers, hashtags, and even meme pages. A text from an old classmate, "Didn't know you were that Natalie Green. Congrats." A former sergeant I barely remembered wrote, "Always knew you'd go far, ma'am." And from someone I didn't recognize at all, "You give me hope. Thank you for your service." I sat on the edge of the bed, the uniform jacket now folded neatly beside me, still carrying the warmth of that moment, of the applause, the respect, the gaze of a president who knew my worth. And yet none of it fully reached the part of me that still remembered the birthdays, missed the calls unanswered, the silence from home. The silence was gone now. Amber called. I stared at the screen as her name flashed once, twice. I let it ring. I couldn't hear her voice. Not yet. Not without remembering the birthday card I'd sent her 5 years ago. The one with a photo of us as kids. No reply ever came. Then Evelyn left a voicemail. Her voice was trembling. Not with grief, but with the weight of realization. Natalie, we were wrong. I was wrong. I don't even know where to start. But if you ever decide to call, please just know your mother is proud of you. Another buzz. An email this time from Harold. Subject. Let me explain. Natalie. I don't know how things got so far. I didn't think it would come to this. I thought I was protecting the family, but maybe I was protecting myself from the truth. I would like to see you. Please, allow your old man the chance to look you in the eye. Marcus knocked gently on my open door. They're all coming out of the woodwork, huh? I didn't look up, just nodded. He sat across from me. You going to respond? I don't know, I said. They chose their silence. I get to choose mine now. He leaned forward. That's fair, but if you don't give them a chance, you may never hear the full truth. I met his gaze firm. I'm not ready. And this time, no one gets to push me. Later that afternoon, CNN reached out the same reporter who'd narrated the ceremony coverage. We'd like to do an in-depth segment, she said over the phone. Your career, your legacy, and the years you were overlooked. There's something compelling about the woman who led with brilliance, but came home to indifference. I paused. Let me think about it. Click. The line went dead, but the echoes didn't fade. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed once more. This time, it wasn't a reporter or a stranger. It was Amber again. The message was simple. I'm coming to the base. I need to look you in the eye. Amber didn't bring flowers. She brought the look of someone seeing herself and me clearly for the first time. The rain tapped gently against the window of the quiet cafe just outside the base. The place smelled faintly of cinnamon and burnt espresso, and the booths were half empty except for the one I sat in. I'd chosen the corner, back against the wall, facing the door. Old habits die hard. When Amber walked in, she was nothing like the glossy version of herself I remembered from Instagram and holiday dinners. No makeup, plain jeans, a jacket one size too big. And her expression, it wasn't apologetic, not quite. It was bare. She spotted me instantly. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just watched. She slid into the seat across from me and took a breath. I didn't come to make excuses, she said. Good. Amber folded her hands in front of her like a student before a lecture. I was wrong. We were wrong. But you never said anything either. I raised an eyebrow. I did many times. You just didn't listen. None of you thought I was worth listening to. Her lips trembled slightly, but she held my gaze. That's true. We treated you like a shadow, like someone who'd chosen a life we couldn't understand, so we stopped trying. Outside, a car passed by its tires, slicing through the wet street. The silence inside the cafe stretched, but it wasn't awkward. It was necessary. Amber continued, voice low. I always thought I was the one who had it harder. Weirdly, the golden child, the one who had to keep the family together to be perfect. They spoiled me, yes, but they expected everything too, and I leaned into it. I thought if I kept pretending you didn't matter, maybe they'd never notice how much you did. I leaned back, letting her words settle. You didn't have to pretend, I said quietly. They'd already decided I didn't. Amber looked away, biting her lower lip. I didn't come to ask you to forgive me, she whispered. I know I don't deserve that. I just needed you to hear me say it. I needed you to know. I see you now. I finally do. Her voice cracked on the last syllable, and she blinked quickly, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. She didn't sob. She didn't collapse. She just sat there, exposed human. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a worn photo, and slid it across the table. It was us two little girls, barefoot in the grass, one missing a front tooth, the other holding a plastic sword like a trophy. Amber stared at it. Her hand hovered above it, but didn't touch. I stood up. I didn't say goodbye. Didn't promise more. Some cracks take years to mend, but at least now the light was getting in. Sometimes the ones who bleed the most aren't the ones who get shot, but the ones quietly killed by silence. The morning sun glared off the asphalt sharp and unrelenting. I'd just finished Dill's sweat still clung to the back of my neck, my breath still steadying from the push-ups Marcus had insisted we add. He'd smiled when I groaned. I didn't smile back. Inside the operations tent, General Cooper handed me a sealed envelope with the Department of Defense crest pressed deep into its flap. He said nothing at first, just waited as I tore it open and scanned the words. "You'll be speaking at the Strategic National Defense Summit," he said simply. "They've named you keynote first woman in 10 years. I didn't respond right away. It felt far away. Another world. Another Natalie. "You earned it," he added softer now. Marcus walked in with a clipboard, glanced at me, and then back at Cooper. "She's also got visitors," he said quietly. "Persistent ones." I didn't need to ask who. I already knew. I changed into a clean shirt and walked across the base toward the gates. From a distance, I could see a figure standing stiffly beyond the barrier, hands in pockets head high. Though his stance betrayed him, he was bracing for something, probably rejection. Harold Green hadn't aged well. His hair had receded further, and the lines around his mouth had deepened, maybe from worry, maybe from guilt, or both. He didn't flinch when I approached, but he didn't smile either. We stood like soldiers, waiting for orders that would never come. "I had to pull strings to get here," he said. "They don't usually let civilians through." I nodded non-committally. "I wanted to see you in person." I folded my arms. "You're seeing me." He shifted uncomfortably. "You've done more than any of us imagined. More than I ever gave you credit for." Still, I said nothing. "I thought I was doing the right thing, keeping you grounded, keeping you close to the family path." His voice cracked. "But I was wrong. I see that now. You made something bigger than I could ever have imagined." A breeze swept through the gate posts, fluttering the base flag high above us. Harold looked down at his feet, then back at me. "Is it too late if I wanted to try again to start over?" I exhaled slowly, deliberately. "It's not that you're too late," I said. "It's that I'm not starting from that place anymore. I've built a different life, one without begging for someone to believe in me." He blinked once. I saw his throat move as he swallowed hard. The same man who once told me emotions were for the weak now stood in front of me, unarmed and unsure. "I just wanted to tell you I'm proud," he murmured, even if I didn't act like it. I gave him a nod, a small one. No anger, no forgiveness, just the quiet boundary I'd fought years to build. Then I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard his footsteps hesitate, then slowly retreat. The sun was still sharp, but I walked into it with my eyes open. They used to erase my name from the dinner table. Today I stand on a stage and say it clearly. I am Natalie Green. The room was vast, rows upon rows of uniforms, medals, and eyes that had seen too much to be easily impressed. A military band had just played a subdued version of America the Beautiful, and the MC's voice echoed through the hall. Our next speaker needs no preamble. You've already seen her story unfold, but let her speak it herself. Please welcome Major General Natalie Green. The lights were sharp. Cameras tracked every step as I walked up to the podium. My name shimmered on the screen behind me. Major General Natalie Green. Not born to legacy, but built by purpose. I paused, scanned the room, not just for the sake of drama, but to feel it. The weight of this moment, the distance from where I had started. I once wrote at 16. I began an essay called Why Honor Matters More Than Glory. I didn't win the scholarship. I was told it was too idealistic. But it stayed with me because in every decision I've made, from the first oath I took in a sand-swept camp to the moments I doubted my own worth, I've clung to one thing. Honor isn't something you inherit. It's something you forge. The silence in the hall was dense, respectful. I joined the military not to prove anyone wrong, but because I knew I couldn't live a life pretending I was less than what I was meant to be. I wasn't born into tradition. I wasn't raised in a home that spoke my language, the language of duty, sacrifice, conviction. My family told me I was difficult, that I made things hard. Maybe I did, but so does truth, and I chose truth. Somewhere in the second row, I saw General Cooper tilt his head ever so slightly. Marcus sat 2 seats down, arms crossed, but lips curled in the smallest grin. He had heard this story before, bits of it, but not like this. I was disowned for wearing a uniform instead of a suit, for choosing orders over holidays, for believing that service to one's country could be as sacred as service to blood. And yet, here I stand. Applause broke out polite, not yet emotional. I wasn't finished. I don't stand here because of medals. I stand here because I kept going. When my name was scratched off the mailbox, when calls went unanswered, when holidays passed with empty chairs and silence, I fought in deserts, in jungles, behind screens, and in front of maps. But my most painful battlefield was a living room where I didn't belong. I took a slow breath. I learned something in all those battles. That family isn't who shares your blood. It's who sees you, who doesn't need an invitation to stand beside you when it counts. Now, the silence held something electric. My name is Natalie Green. I am not the daughter of a legacy. I am not the product of privilege. I am a soldier who refused to be forgotten. And for every young woman who was ever told she was too much, too bold, too distant, I am you. Applause burst forth. This time, not out of courtesy, but from something real. The MC approached, but before he could reclaim the mic, a voice called from the press section. Major General Green, do you have any message for your family? I didn't flinch. I did send one, I replied. Years ago, they returned it, so now I keep it. A pause, a beat, then a wave of standing ovations swept through the room. No anthem, no order, just hands clapping for someone who had never expected them. When I returned to my hotel room that night, the inbox on my phone blinked with unread messages, but only one stood out. Subject: Do you want to see Mom from Amber Green? I stared at it for a long time, not opening it, not deleting it either, just holding it there, like a letter I'd already written in a voice I had finally claimed. She once taught me how to button my blouse, but when I needed her to say one thing, just one, she said nothing. The hospital room was dim, save for the filtered light slanting through beige blinds, casting dusty lines across the tile floor. Evelyn lay still in the narrow bed, eyes half closed as if pretending not to notice when I entered, but her fingers tightened slightly around the thin sheet, enough to betray that she had. I stood silently for a moment, the door clicking shut behind me. The air smelled like antiseptic and wilted flowers. I stepped forward and placed a small vase of blue delphiniums on the side table. She used to plant them in our front yard back when I was small enough to believe she'd always choose me. Evelyn didn't look at me. She stared toward the wall, as though it held something worth escaping into. I didn't come here to fight, I said, my voice low. Still no movement. I pulled up a chair and sat beside her. There was so much I could say, so many words that had built up calcified in the years we didn't speak, but none of them felt right in this moment. The silence wrapped around us like a second curtain. At last, she spoke, quiet, raspy, but firm. I taught you how to live well. I just never had the courage to live beside you. I blinked slowly, unsure if the sharpness in my chest was grief, anger, or some strange combination of both. Is that what this is? I asked. Courage. She turned her head just slightly, finally meeting my eyes. Hers were sunken-rimmed red, not from tears I suspected, but from the weight of years buried in avoidance. I don't need anything, she said. No apologies, no explanations. I just wanted to see you one time. Not as someone I failed, just as my daughter. I sat back, let the words settle. She hadn't asked for forgiveness. She hadn't earned it. But in her own fractured way, she was reaching across a chasm she helped dig. You didn't stand up for me, I said, voice steady. You watched them dismiss me. You let them erase me. Evelyn winced. I know. Why? Her eyes drifted toward the window. Because I feared your father more than I feared the truth. There it was, the sentence I'd carried like an open wound since I was 14. I stood slowly, the chair creaking as I pushed it back. Her gaze followed. You don't need to forgive me either, I told her. But if you want to see me clearly, even once I'm here right now. Standing, a long pause, then just as I turned to leave, her voice caught me. You're not like him, she whispered. You're better. I didn't reply. I couldn't. My throat tightened as I walked out of the room, past the nurse who nodded gently, past Amber, waiting in the hallway with red-rimmed eyes. I didn't stop. I didn't need her permission anymore. Evelyn whispered, I'm not like my father. I'm better than him. They invited me for dinner, but that chair, I gave it back a long time ago. The car pulled up outside the old house just after dusk. Amber had sent it along with a carefully worded message. If you want closure, maybe you should let them try. Closure. As if it were a form I needed to sign off on, as if their guilt could be exchanged for reconciliation. I stood in front of the house that no longer felt like mine. The porch light flickered. Inside, I could see silhouettes moving in the kitchen. My mother at the stove, my father pouring wine, Amber setting the table. For a moment, the scene almost looked warm, but memories returned, sharp and uninvited. The last dinner I had sat at this table years ago, Amber had just gotten her acceptance letter to college. Everyone raised their glasses. No one noticed the envelope with my enlistment papers still sealed in my lap. I stepped inside. The smell of roast and herbs tried to play nostalgia, but my chest stayed still. Amber met me at the door with a smile too hesitant to be sincere. We're glad you came, she said, and I nodded. Evelyn was at the stove, thinner now, paler since the hospital. Harold gave me a stiff, awkward nod. We sat. The meat was well cooked. The wine was expensive. Conversation tried to start. Amber talked about her firm's latest case, Harold about politics. My mother barely touched her food. I saw your speech, Harold said after a while. The one at the defense summit. I took a sip of water. Did you? He nodded. Impressive. Very articulate. A lot of people are proud of you, Natalie. Are they? I said. Interesting. Silence followed. Amber pushed her mashed potatoes around with her fork. Evelyn's hands trembled faintly as she refilled her glass. I think it's brave, Amber said suddenly, that you're not angry that you came tonight. I looked at her. I didn't come because I'm not angry. That startled her. She opened her mouth and closed it again. Harold cleared his throat and raised his glass. To family, he said, and to forgiveness. Thank you for coming home. I didn't raise my glass. I placed it down gently. I'm not here to forgive. His face fell. Natalie, I came. I said, voice steady, because I wanted you to hear this from me clearly. I don't carry hate anymore, but don't mistake peace for return. Amber's voice cracked. Can't we start over? I met her eyes. Starting over doesn't mean going back to what it was. And what it was never saw me. Evelyn whispered, almost inaudible. We're trying. I know, I said softly, but you're trying now that everyone else saw me first. The silence turned heavier, denser. Even the clinking of cutlery had ceased. I stood up. My chair made a soft scraping sound against the old wooden floor. I'll be going now. Amber's lip trembled. Do you have to? I nodded. The base has curfew. And besides this dinner, this house, it belongs to the three of you. It always did. They didn't follow me to the door. No one protested. No one begged. Outside, the night was cool and clear. I looked up at the stars. The same stars I used to count through my bedroom window as a girl wondering what kind of world was waiting for me out there. I found it, and it wasn't here. I turned my boots crunching softly on the gravel. I said nothing else. Some things I had already buried. They used to call me a burden. Now I sign appointments with the same name they once tried to forget. The office smelled of fresh paint and polished wood. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long golden lines across the sleek surface of the desk. A new brass nameplate gleamed at the center, Major General Natalie Green. I ran my fingers lightly along its edge. It felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's shoes, until I reminded myself, no, these are mine. I built them from the ground up. Marcus leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching with a half smile. Fits you better than your old barracks, he said. I smiled back. It better. Took me 20 years to earn this square footage. Command has finalized your portfolio, he added, handing me a thick folder. Senior Ethics and Honor Advisor. Full discretion policy influenced direct access to the Pentagon chain. I flipped through the pages nodding. It wasn't the power that interested me. It was what the title meant. I was no longer someone people tolerated. I was someone they consulted. Later that afternoon, my new military aide knocked lightly and opened the door. Behind her stood a young woman in crisp, anxious uniform, barely past 20, eyes filled with a cocktail of admiration and fear. This is Eliza Morales, the aide said. New recruit. She requested 5 minutes. I gestured her in at ease. Morales, she swallowed. Ma'am, people in my unit, they think I'm soft. They say I don't belong, that I'm wasting time. I studied her face. It wasn't tears she held back. It was something harder shame, the kind you start to believe. Do you want to be here, I asked. Yes, ma'am. More than anything. Then write your name with what you do, not what they say. She blinked. I don't understand. You will, I said, standing. I walked to the cabinet, pulled out a framed photo of my first squad rough faces, mud-streaked uniforms, and me, smallest of them all, still unproven. They called me dead weight once, said I wouldn't last a month. Her eyes widened. I lasted 20 years. You don't need their permission to matter, just consistency. She stood straighter. Thank you, ma'am. As she left, I returned to my desk. In the drawer, folded neatly, was an envelope. I had never opened my father's letter sent weeks ago. I stared at it a long moment, then placed it into a locked box. Some things weren't doors. They were traps shaped like apologies. The light was fading when Marcus came in again. You know, I never got a chance to say it properly, he said. Congratulations. I nodded, lifting the first document of my tenure. It was a directive for ethics training reform, one that would reach every base nationwide. I picked up the pen. The weight of it wasn't heavy. It was earned, by order of Major General Natalie Green. As the ink dried, I glanced at my calendar. A red marker circled the date for my first official visit next Tuesday. Location Fort Hole, the base where I'd once spent nights writing letters home that were never answered. The place where I first saluted and was ignored by the senior staff because I didn't look like a soldier. Now, I was going back as their superior. I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair. No applause, no cameras, just the quiet satisfaction of a name signed without flinching. I was going back not to ask for space, but to take it. There are doors you don't need to close because you've already walked beyond them. The base looked smaller now, not because it had changed. Same gravel path, same red clay stains on the lower bricks, but because I had changed. Time did that. So did truth. I stepped out of the Jeep, boots hitting the ground with a dull thud. The wind carried faint echoes of marching cadence from the far end of the field. I stood still, watching the new recruits run their drills formation slightly off rhythm, still learning itself. Once I stood where they stood, trying to blend in, afraid to be seen for who I really was. Now, I stood apart, not above, just steadier. Eliza spotted me first. She jogged up a little out of breath, saluted sharply. Ma'am? At ease, Morales, I said, with a nod. How are they treating you? Better, she admitted. Still rough, but I remember what you said. Every time someone doubts me, I double-check my own faith instead of theirs. That's a good place to start. We walked together to the edge of the field, watching the drills. Her hands fidgeted at her sides, nerves flickering under the surface. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a thin leather bracelet, faded, worn, frayed at the edges. This, I said, handing it to her, belonged to a medic in my first unit. He saved my life in Kandahar and died 3 weeks later. I've kept it ever since. She stared at it. I can't take this. You're not taking it. I'm passing it on. That's different. I met her eyes. Carry it like I did. Not for decoration, but for direction. Her voice caught. I will. I promise. Later. Later that evening, after the day's final debrief, I walked alone through the outskirts of the base toward a small chapel, tucked between 2 oak trees. It looked exactly as I remembered, weather-worn stone, creaking wooden steps, and a rusted iron cross that leaned slightly to the left. I opened the door. No service, no choir, just silence. I sat on the second pew, hands folded loosely in my lap. The air smelled like candle wax and cedar. Once I'd come here after losing half my squad in an ambush. I had sat in the dark and asked questions I still didn't have answers to. Why them? Why not me? Today, I asked nothing. I just breathed. Footsteps echoed softly behind me. The old priest, still alive, somehow walked slowly to the front altar and turned. I remember you, he said, voice raspy. You came here in uniform and left with tear-stained sleeves. I offered a small smile. That sounds about right, he nodded. Back then, you asked for forgiveness. I nodded slowly. Today I think I've finally given it. To whom? To myself. He smiled gently. That's the hardest one. I stood nodding in thanks. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. As I reached the door, I paused. I turned and looked at the wooden interior. Faded benches, quiet walls, memories soaked into every grain. Then I stepped outside. The cool air greeted me like an old friend. Behind me, the door creaked softly, but didn't close. No wind slammed it. No hand pushed it shut. I kept walking. Some doors didn't need to be closed. Not anymore. I used to think I needed a family to live, but all I ever needed was myself. And one truth no one could take away. Spring had finally arrived at the lake. Mist skimmed the surface like whispered memories, and the flag on my porch danced gently in the morning breeze. The air was crisp, not cold, quiet, not lonely. I stepped outside with a cup of black coffee in hand, steam rising slowly like the first breath of a clean day. My cabin, small and weathered, had become a place of shelter, not just from storms, but from the weight of pretending. Today was for closing. Not doors, not wounds, but circles. Inside, I sat at the worn desk beneath the open window and began writing. The first letter was to Marcus. Thank you for standing beside me when I didn't know how to stand on my own. You reminded me who I was before anyone else dared to say it out loud. The second was to Eliza. That bracelet never really belonged to me. It belonged to the person who needed to carry it next. Carry it with courage. Carry it until you meet someone who needs it more. I sealed the envelope slowly. Hand steady, heart lighter than it had been in years. My phone buzzed on the desk. A photo from Eliza. She stood in full uniform, fresh from graduation. Her posture proud, her eyes lit with something deeper than joy resolve. On her wrist, the bracelet still worn, still strong. I smiled. A few minutes later, another ping. A video message from Marcus. The frame opened to his grinning face. General Green, he said, mock formality in his voice. You've earned a dozen titles by now, but for what it's worth out here, you're more than just a decorated officer. You're the damn lighthouse that kept half of us from sinking. Don't ever forget that. I replayed the message once, then again, not because I needed to hear it, but because this time I believed it. Later, I opened my journal, leather-bound, almost full now. I flipped past pages of doubt, of anger, of aching silence, and began to write something new. They never called me one of them. They never offered a place to sit or a name worth carrying. That's fine, because now I carry my own name, and I sit at a table of my own making. I paused, pen resting between my fingers. Near the edge of the desk sat the envelope, the one from my father unopened, yellowing now, frayed at the corners. It had followed me through hotels' barrack spaces, and finally here. Today, I didn't need its contents. I took it outside. The wind was still gentle. The grass had a new sheen to it, kissed by dew. I lit a match. Flame touched paper. It curled and blackened, soft and soundless. No grand gesture, just release. Ash drifted up into the sunlight. Back inside, I stood in front of the mirror. My full uniform lay across the armchair. I put it on slowly, deliberately. Each button a choice. Each ribbon a memory. When I looked up, something had shifted. My reflection stared back. Not as a stranger, not as a soldier in search of permission, but as a woman who had earned her place in every room, even the ones that had once shut her out. I let the silence settle around me, steady as breath. Then I said it softly, clearly, like a name reclaimed. I see you now, Natalie Green. They erased my name from the family table, but in the end it was etched into a nation's memory. I stood not to seek their approval, but to prove that silence cannot bury the truth forever. Justice doesn't always shout, it waits. It watches, and then it rises when no one expects. Like the final strike of a gavel in a long-delayed trial, it may arrive late, but it leaves no doubt once it lands. And maybe, just maybe, standing tall today means you'll never again have to kneel before injustice tomorrow. Like, share, and comment your thoughts below. Type 1 if you felt this story spoke to you, or 2 if something still lingers unresolved.